Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to All on the Mat. I am your host, Sunny Warcloud. Today, we are going to be discussing one of my favorite, probably my favorite division in all of professional wrestling, the tag team division. And we are going to narrow down on the 1980s. This was, in my opinion, the greatest decade as far as tag teams were concerned. Now, before I begin, I have to show these guys here, Hawk and Animal, or Animal and Hawk, however you put it, the Legion of Doom, the Road Warriors, probably the greatest tag team in wrestling history. But to be honest, they were more of a WCW or NWA team, even AWA as far as back as the 1980s. So if we're going to mention some WCW teams, have to show the Steiners. Yes, they were in the WWF, but a little bit later on, in 1991, 92, I believe, maybe 93. But they were more of a WCW team, and so were these guys, Doom. And I have to mention a couple of these teams, guys, because they were very famous, and in my opinion, some of the greatest. And of course, these guys, probably not my favorite, but the Nasty Boys, definitely worth mentioning. And you go into the mid to late 90s, and the Outsiders were definitely a force in WCW. Now, in my opinion, this was the best true tag team in WCW history. Harlem Heat, Stevie Ray, Booker T, just incredible. And before I really get into the 1980s of the WWF, at this time, there was some good teams in the WWF as well. I like the Hardy Boys. They were revolutionary. And you can't mention them without mentioning Edge and Christian. But I mean, those guys were high flyers. You still had some muscle-bound teams, some powerhouse teams like the APA. Just incredible. Bradshaw, Farouk. Unforgettable, guys. So, let us begin with this team here, Demolition. And these guys were incredible. Axe and Smash, or actually how they're placed here, that is Smash and Axe. But for namesake, it is Axe and Smash of Demolition. I was around at the time that these guys were striking it hot, and I'm telling you right now, it was like being around for Beatlemania. So popular. And these guys were big bruisers. And you may find it interesting that I began with Demolition. I could have easily finished off with Demolition because I am going to finish off with my two favorite teams of all time. But like a true wrestling event, you have to begin with a good match, and this video begins with a good team. A little bit later on to the early 90s, these guys did form a trio, and it kind of watered them down. And they faded away. And another team, just like Demolition, as far as the size and the muscle and the mass was concerned, was this team here. And in my opinion, these guys were incredible, probably better than Demolition. But the other fans did not see it that way. This is Powers of Pain, Warlord, Barbarian. When I was a kid, I did not understand why everybody booed these guys. I wanted these guys to be the champions, and they never even won the belt. Isn't that incredible? Probably the greatest tag team of all time in the WWF to never win the tag titles. And I am calling it WWF in this, not WWE at all, because it was the WWF in the 1980s. And speaking of bad teams, because these guys were heels, so to speak, bad guys, there was many other heel teams like these guys, and many of you guys that probably did watch wrestling in the 1980s plumb forgot about these guys. Bobby Heenan's Islanders and Haku, he was probably the leader of that team. I'm not exactly sure the other guy's name. Toma. Jesse the Body Ventura, he always used to get it wrong. Tama, it's Toma if I say it's Toma. Anyway, guys, here was a true monster heel team, the Wild Samoans, and these guys were around before the Islanders, and the Islanders pretty much kept the tradition alive of the Samoan type island type team. But man, oh man, these Wild Samoans, these guys were an early 80s team, and they rocked the foundation of the tag team division. And I'm telling you right now, guys, watch some of their old matches. Nobody messed around with these guys, not even Andre the Giant. And there was a lot of colorful teams back then. Here was Mr. Fuji and Mr. Saito, and I'm not exactly sure if they had a name, these guys. They were not the Orient Express, like many of you guys might think. That was a little bit later on there was a team. Captain Louis Albano, their manager, he managed a lot of tag teams. Definitely worth throwing his name in this video. Speaking of colorful teams, this is Tony Atlas and Rocky Johnson. They were the first black tag team to win the tag titles in the WWF. Just incredible, these guys, back in the early 80s. I'm telling you right now, as far as muscle teams were concerned, for their time, these two physiques, revolutionary. They could have been professional bodybuilders. I believe Tony Atlas was actually a competitive bodybuilder. So popular was this team. And so was this team right here. The U.S. Express. There was a lot of Express teams. Orient Express, U.S. Express. Anyway, guys, Barry Windham, Mike Rotunda. These guys come through the curtains. I'm telling you right now, you could hear all the girls screaming. They thought these guys were the boy next door. I'm telling you right now. And then they ran into this here faction. And this was a different sort of a team, a faction. Just two singles wrestlers put together. Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik. I don't believe they had a name. Oh man, these guys were awesome. They even sold their rubber wrestlers as a team. So they were a true team, and they won the tag titles. So this is really the first, like I call, a faction in this video. But there was many other factions. Like these guys. This is Cowboy Bob Orton and Don the Rock Morocco. I would say they were a very popular team, but they were a very hated and disliked team. Talk about heels. These guys were the dirtiest heels going. Of course, the Dream Team would probably argue that point. These guys were, let's face it, downright dirty old heels too, I'm telling you right now. This was Greg the Hammer Valentine with Brutus minus the barber, Beefcake. He was just Brutus Beefcake. He hadn't garnered that barber gimmick yet. And these guys did win the tag titles, the Dream Team. And I believe this was the only belt that Brutus Beefcake ever won. And we're going to continue with some factions, and we're going to continue with some heel factions. This here team of Big John Studd, or the Giant John Studd, and King Kong Bundy. I think they pulled the plug on these guys a little too fast. This team right here could have defeated just about any team that I mentioned. And that includes guys like Demolition, Powers of Pain. I'm telling you right now, these guys, 400 plus pounds for King Kong Bundy, near 400 pounds for Big John Studd. What team could have ever defeated them? Well, I guess you could argue and say Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan. And there was a team right there. I mean, these two guys, probably the only two dudes to be able to stand up against King Kong Bundy and the Giant John Studd. Hogan and Andre, they headlined so many tag matches, Madison Square Garden, many other venues. I'm telling you right now, probably the most dominant tag team in WWF history. But it didn't last. They couldn't get along, you see. There was some jealousy involved, I think. I mean, Andre never won a single title, and Hogan was running around with that belt, and it culminated, of course, WrestleMania 3. But that's history. There was another tag team with Hulk Hogan, and probably more of a prolific tag team. They even had a name. Macho Man Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan. They formed the Mega Powers, and these guys, I mean, they even had matching tights. I mean, so did Andre and Hogan. At times they did. But these guys, they even had it written on their tights. They were the Mega Powers. And just like Hulk and Andre, these guys couldn't get along either. And they culminated their tag team with a big matchup at WrestleMania 5. So that just goes to show you guys, don't form a faction, don't form a team with Hulk Hogan, because you'll end up fighting him. Of course, if you want to talk factions, and the very first, probably, of this type that was successful, this was a heel faction, the East-West Connection. I almost plumb forgot about this team.
Jesse the Body Ventura, the man that tells it like it is, ha ha ha.
And his partner, of course, Adrian Adonis, the adorable one. Adrian Adonis and these guys, I'm telling you, they wreaked havoc. But this was actually before all of those other factions that I mentioned. Now let's look at some true tag teams, matching tights, things of that nature. This was the Can-Am Connection, not to be confused with this team here, which also had Rick Martel. This was Tito Santana and Rick Martel, and they were the Strike Force. And with Tommy Zink, the American, leaving the team, and they brought Tito Santana, who was a Mexican. So it was a Mexican and a Canadian. Since they called the other team the Can-Am Connection, they should have called these guys the Mexican. Mexican? Canadian? The Mexicans? The Mexican Connection? No? Anyway. There was also this team here, the Rougeau brothers, and they were all American boys, so to speak. They were actually Canadians. Oh, I love this team, the Killer Bees. Did anybody forget about these guys, the Killer Bees? They were awesome. Never won a tag title, though. The Brainbusters, they did pick up a tag title. Then there was the Bolsheviks. I mean, the list continues. The Young Stallions. I'm sure there's a good percentage of you guys that forgot about the Young Stallions. Here is a pretty unforgettable team. Big Boss Man and the African Dream, Akeem. The Twin Towers, as Slick the Doctor of Style used to say. Just incredible, these guys, so dominant. And I feared these guys when I was a kid. Here is the Colossal Connection. Haku and Andre the Giant. And I'm going to finish off with these guys before I show you my favorite two teams, because these guys finished off the 1980s holding on to those tag titles. Of course, they lost it in 1990. At WrestleMania 6, I believe, to Demolition. But anyway, guys, that is a heck of a lot of tag teams, and I still haven't even shown you my favorite two teams. So, without further ado, we'll begin with this team, and this is no real particular order. This is the Hart Foundation. Bret the Hitman Hart and Jim the Anvil Neidhart. These guys, of course, were a heel team, but a very dominant heel team. Of course, they won the titles, and the 1980s was all about talking and just cartoonish type physiques. But these guys basically had to work for their spots, and that's why they were my favorite team, or one of two favorite teams. And this was the other of the two, the British Bulldogs. And actually, probably the main reason why the two teams were my favorite is because of the clinics, the wrestling clinics that these guys put on. These two teams put on, by far, the best matches of 90% of the events that they competed in. I'm telling you right now, if you get a chance, watch some of the old, in particular, some of the old house shows. Not the bigger events, but some of the smaller house shows. These guys really, they tore the house down each and every time. And as a wrestling fan that appreciates the technical side of the quote-unquote sport, I truly appreciate both teams. But I have to say, I'm going to finish off the video by saying the British Bulldogs were my number one favorite team. I think both teams were incredible, the wrestling skill, but these guys, I mean, they even resembled each other. They had the look, they had the muscularity, they had the skill. Anyway, guys, could have honestly went either way. Love the Hart Foundation as well. But I have to pick one at the end of the day. I mean, these guys had the little dog with them. Matilda. I have to pick the British Bulldogs. Hit thumbs up on the video, guys, if you did enjoy it, and subscribe to the channel for more wrestling action. Have a great day.